The town of Willowbrook was a quaint little place, known for its charming cobblestone streets and the smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the air every morning. Nestled in the heart of the town stood Marcus Black's Bakery, a small but beloved establishment that had been serving the community for over 2 decades. Marcus, affectionately called the Black Baker by locals, wasn't just known for his delicious sourdough loaves or buttery croissants. He was also admired for his kind heart and gentle demeanor. His warm smile and willingness to lend an ear made him a favorite among the townsfolk. On one particularly cold winter night, the streets of Willowbrook were eerily quiet. Snowflakes danced gently in the wind as the moonlight cast long shadows across the empty alleys. Marcus had just finished closing up his shop for the day. He wiped down the countertops, turned off the lights, and stepped outside, pulling his thick coat tighter around himself to ward off the biting chill. The bakery was always Marcus's sanctuary, a place where he found peace and purpose. But tonight, something felt different, off even, as if the stillness of the town carried an unspoken secret. As Marcus locked the back door of the bakery, he heard it, faint shuffling coming from the narrow alley behind the building. At first, he thought, it might be a stray cat rummaging through the trash bins, but the sound grew louder and more deliberate. Curiosity tugged at him, urging him to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight from his pocket, Marcus cautiously approached the source of the noise. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. There, crouched beside the dumpster, was a young man no older than 18. His clothes were ragged, patched together with frayed threads, and his face was smudged with dirt. His hands trembled as he sifted through the discarded food scraps, searching for anything edible. Marcus's chest tightened as he took in the sight. It was clear this boy hadn't eaten properly in days or maybe weeks. Hunger had hollowed out his cheeks and exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders. Despite the desperation etched into his features, there was something about him that struck Marcus as familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. For a moment, neither of them moved. The boy froze, his wide eyes locked onto Marcus like a deer caught in headlights. Fear flickered across his face, and he instinctively clutched a half-eaten loaf of bread closer to his chest. Marcus raised his hands slowly, palms facing outward, to show he meant no harm. "Hey," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. "It's okay. You don't have to be afraid." The words seemed to break some invisible tension hanging in the air. The boy hesitated, then nodded slightly, though his grip on the bread didn't loosen. Marcus could see the conflict in his eyes, the shame of being caught, mixed with the primal need to survive. It was a look Marcus recognized all too well. Growing up, he had faced his own share of hardships, scraping by on meager meals and dreaming of a better life. That memory stirred something deep within him, a sense of empathy he couldn't ignore. "Are you hungry?" Marcus asked, taking a cautious step forward. The boy nodded again, barely perceptible, but enough for Marcus to understand. Without another word, Marcus gestured toward the bakery's back door. "Come inside. I'll fix you something warm to eat." At first, the boy hesitated, suspicion clouding his expression. Who wouldn't? Strangers offering help often came with strings attached, or worse. But Marcus's tone was genuine, devoid of judgment or pity. After a long pause, the boy finally stood up, brushing snow off his threadbare jacket. He followed Marcus reluctantly, keeping a safe distance as they entered the dimly lit bakery. Inside, the warmth of the ovens lingered, wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. Marcus busied himself preparing a simple meal, a bowl of hearty vegetable soup and a slice of crusty bread fresh from the day's batch. As the aroma filled the room, the boy's guard began to drop, replaced by a hunger so raw it was almost palpable. When Marcus placed the steaming bowl in front of him, the boy hesitated only briefly before digging in, savoring each bite as if it were his first meal in years. While the boy ate, Marcus sat across from him, watching silently. There was a story here, he knew, buried beneath the layers of grime and fear. "What's your name?" Marcus asked gently, breaking the silence. The boy paused mid-bite, glancing up warily. For a second, Marcus thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he muttered, Ethan. Well, Ethan, Marcus said with a small smile, you're welcome here. No questions asked. Ethereal relief washed over Ethan's face, though it was fleeting. He quickly returned to his meal, avoiding eye contact. Marcus didn't press further. Some wounds needed time to heal before they could be spoken aloud. Instead, he offered a simple promise. If you need a place to stay tonight, you can sleep. In the storage room upstairs. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. Ethan looked up sharply, surprise written all over his face. Why are you helping me? He blurted out, his voice tinged with disbelief. I was stealing from you. Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. Everyone makes mistakes, Ethan. What matters is what you do next. And right now, it looks like you could use a friend. That night, as Ethan settled into the makeshift bed Marcus had prepared for him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled upon something extraordinary. In a world that had shown him little kindness, Marcus Black had extended a hand, without expecting anything in return. Little did either of them know, this chance encounter would set into motion a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the cracks in the storage room's wooden shutters, casting golden patterns on the floor. Ethan woke up to the faint smell of freshly baked bread wafting upstairs. For a moment, he lay still, unsure if the events of the previous night had been real or just another fleeting dream. But as he sat up and rubbed his eyes, the soft creak of footsteps below reminded him that Marcus Black, the man who had shown him unexpected kindness, was very much real. Ethan hesitated before descending the narrow staircase. He wasn't used to being cared for, let alone trusted. The world had taught him to expect betrayal at every turn, and yet here he was, sitting in someone else's home after stealing from them. Guilt gnawed at him, but so did curiosity. Who was this man who offered help without asking for anything in return? And why did he seem so determined to give Ethan a second chance? When Ethan finally made his way downstairs, Marcus greeted him with a warm smile. Morning, he said, sliding a plate of buttered toast and scrambled eggs across the counter. Eat up, you'll need your strength. Ethan stared at the food, then at Marcus, unsure how to respond. I don't know what to say, he admitted quietly. You didn't have to do any of this. Marcus shrugged, brushing flour off his hands. Everyone deserves a shot at starting over, Ethan. Besides, you looked like you could use a break. It was true. Ethan hadn't eaten a proper meal in weeks. Hunger had driven him to desperate measures, forcing him to scavenge for scraps behind restaurants and grocery stores. But it wasn't just physical hunger that plagued him. It was the emptiness of years spent bouncing between foster homes, running away from abusive relatives and trying to survive on his own. Life had hardened him, making him wary of kindness because it usually came with strings attached. Yet Marcus seemed different. There was no judgment in his gaze, no hidden agenda lurking beneath his words, just genuine concern. Over the next few days, Ethan stayed at the bakery, helping out in small ways to repay Marcus's generosity. At first, he mostly cleaned dishes and swept floors, tasks that required little skill but gave him a sense of purpose. Slowly, though, Marcus began teaching him the basics of baking, kneading dough, shaping loaves, and timing the ovens. Ethan had never imagined himself working in a bakery, but there was something oddly satisfying about creating something from scratch. Watching raw ingredients transform into golden loaves filled him with a pride he hadn't felt in years. As they worked side by side, Marcus encouraged Ethan to open up about his past. It wasn't easy. Every question felt like prying open a wound, but Marcus listened patiently, never pushing too hard. One evening, as they sat together sipping hot cocoa, Ethan finally began to share fragments of his story. He spoke about growing up in a household where love was scarce and violence was common. His father's drunken rages left scars both visible and invisible, while his mother's absence carved an even deeper void. When he was 12, social services intervened, placing him in a series of foster homes that ranged from indifferent to outright cruel. By 16, he'd decided he'd rather face the streets than endure another placement. You've been through a lot, Marcus said softly when Ethan finished speaking. But you're stronger than you think. Look at how far you've come, already." Ethan frowned, shaking his head. "I haven't done anything special. I'm just surviving." "Surviving is something," Marcus replied firmly. "And now? Now you have a chance to thrive, to build a life worth living." Those words stuck with Ethan long after their conversation ended. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond mere survival. Maybe he could finish high school, or at least get his GED. Maybe he could find work that didn't involve dodging trouble or scraping by. Maybe, just maybe, he could become someone people respected instead of pitied. With Marcus's encouragement, Ethan enrolled in a local adult education program designed to help students earn their diplomas. Balancing classes with his duties at the bakery wasn't easy, especially since he still struggled with feelings of inadequacy, but Marcus believed in him, and that belief proved contagious. On nights when Ethan doubted himself, Marcus would remind him of how far he'd come. "You're not the same person who walked into my alley last week," he'd say. "Don't forget that." In addition to tutoring Ethan in math and reading, Marcus introduced him to the joys of baking. What started as simple chores evolved into lessons in patience, precision, and creativity. Ethan discovered that baking wasn't just about following recipes. It was about understanding textures, flavors, and timing. Each loaf told a story. Each pastry carried a piece of the baker's soul. Under Marcus's guidance, Ethan began crafting his own creations, experimenting with new combinations and techniques. Some attempts failed miserably, resulting in burnt cookies or flat cakes, but Marcus always laughed it off. "Every mistake teaches us something," he'd say. "That's how we grow." As weeks turned into months, Ethan grew more confident, not just in his abilities, but in himself. He formed friendships with other students in his GED class, and even started mentoring younger kids who stopped by the bakery after school. Seeing their faces light up over free muffins or slices of pie reminded him of how much Marcus's kindness had meant to him. In turn, he vowed to pay it forward, offering advice and encouragement whenever he could. Despite these positive changes, however, Ethan couldn't shake the lingering guilt over how he'd entered Marcus's life. No matter how many times Marcus assured him that the past didn't matter, Ethan couldn't help feeling like he owed him more than he could ever repay. This debt weighed heavily on him, especially as rumors began circulating around town about the mysterious boy living above the bakery. Some whispered that Ethan was trouble, a runaway with a criminal streak. Others speculated that Marcus was foolish to take him in. Though Marcus dismissed the gossip with a shrug, Ethan knew it bothered him more than he let on. One afternoon, as they prepared for the day's rush, Ethan voiced his concerns. "What if people are right?" he asked, rolling dough into tight balls for dinner rolls. "What if I bring bad luck to everyone around me?" Marcus stopped what he was doing and placed a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Listen to me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Bad luck doesn't follow people. It follows choices. And right now, you're choosing to make things better, not worse. That's all that matters." Ethan nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. He wanted to believe Marcus, but deep down he feared the worst was yet to come. Little did he know, fate had other plans, and soon everything would change in ways neither of them could predict. Months passed, and life at the bakery settled into a comforting rhythm. Ethan had grown accustomed to the early mornings, the hum of the ovens warming up, and the steady flow of customers who came not just for Marcus's famous sourdough, but also for the warmth of his hospitality. The bond between Ethan and Marcus deepened with each passing day. What had started as an act of charity had blossomed into something far more meaningful, a mentorship, a friendship, and for Ethan, a newfound sense of belonging. But even the most stable lives can be upended by forces beyond control. One fateful evening, as Marcus locked up the shop after a busy day, disaster struck without warning. It began with a faint crackling sound from the back of the bakery, almost like the snapping of dry twigs. At first, Marcus dismissed it as nothing more than the building settling. An old structure like this often creaked and groaned. But when the smell of smoke reached his nostrils, he froze. "Ethan!" Marcus called out sharply, his voice cutting through the quiet night. "Get out here now!" Ethan emerged from the storage room upstairs, his face pale with alarm. By then, thick plumes of smoke were billowing from the kitchen area, choking the air and making it hard to breathe. Flames licked hungrily at the wooden beams and countertops, spreading faster than either of them could comprehend. Panic surged through Ethan as he realized what was happening. The bakery, their sanctuary, was on fire. "Call the fire department," Marcus shouted, grabbing a nearby extinguisher. He rushed toward the flames, trying desperately to contain them before they consumed everything. Ethan hesitated, torn between helping Marcus and following his instructions. Finally, he ran outside to call for help, his hands trembling so badly that he nearly dropped the phone. By the time the firefighters arrived, the blaze had engulfed much of the bakery. The once cozy space was now a charred ruin, its walls blackened and its shelves reduced to ash. Water poured down from hoses, dousing the remaining embers, but the damage was done. As Ethan stood in the cold night air, watching the destruction unfold, tears streamed down his face. This wasn't just a building, it was their home, their livelihood, the place where he'd found hope after years of despair. Marcus appeared beside him, coughing slightly from the smoke. His face was streaked with soot, but his expression remained, calm despite the devastation around them. "It's gone," Ethan whispered hoarsely, unable to tear his eyes away from the wreckage. "Everything. It's all gone." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We're alive," he said firmly. "That's what matters. Everything else can be rebuilt." Though Marcus tried to stay positive, the reality of the situation weighed heavily on both of them. The bakery had been Marcus's life's work, a testament to decades of dedication and hard-earned success. Now it was nothing more than rubble. Insurance would cover some of the losses, but not enough to rebuild immediately. For a man in his late 50s, starting over felt daunting. Not impossible, perhaps, but certainly exhausting. In the days that followed, Marcus made the difficult decision to retire. He sold what little remained of the property and used the money to purchase a small cottage in the countryside, far from the hustle and bustle of Willowbrook. It was a peaceful retreat, surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests, but it marked the end of an era. Ethan struggled to process the change. He wanted to support Marcus, to help him navigate this new chapter, but guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. Deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the fire and Marcus's subsequent departure was somehow his fault. "You've done so much for me," Ethan confessed one evening as they packed up the last of Marcus's belongings, "and I ruined everything." Marcus stopped folding a stack of clothes and turned to face him. "You didn't ruin anything, Ethan. Fires happen. Life happens. None of this is your responsibility." But Ethan couldn't accept that. To him, the timing seemed too cruel to be coincidental. If he hadn't come into Marcus's life, if he hadn't brought trouble with him, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe Marcus would still have his bakery, his routine, his happiness. The weight of these thoughts became unbearable, pressing down on Ethan until he felt suffocated. One morning, while Marcus was out running errands, Ethan packed a small bag and scribbled a note on the back of an old receipt. His handwriting was shaky, betraying the storm of emotions raging inside him. "I'm sorry I ruined your life. Thank you for saving mine." He left the note on the kitchen table and slipped out the door, heading toward the bus station. Every step felt heavier than the last, but he convinced himself it was for the best. Marcus deserved peace, and Ethan knew he couldn't provide that. He needed to leave, to disappear before he caused any more harm. The journey away from Willowbrook was long and lonely. Ethan boarded a series of buses, unsure of his destination but certain of one thing: he couldn't go back. As the miles stretched behind him, memories of the bakery flooded his mind. The smell of rising dough, the laughter shared over steaming cups of coffee, the quiet moments of learning and growth. Each memory was bittersweet, a reminder of how much he'd gained and how much he'd lost. Eventually, Ethan found himself in a bustling city hundreds of miles away. The noise and chaos were overwhelming at first, but they also provided a strange kind of anonymity. No one here knew his story. No one judged him for his past mistakes. He took odd jobs to get by, washing dishes, stocking shelves, delivering packages, but he never stayed in one place for too long. Moving constantly helped him outrun the guilt, though it never fully disappeared. Despite the distance, Ethan thought about Marcus often. He wondered how the older man was adjusting to life in the countryside, whether he missed the bakery as much as Ethan did. More than anything, he wished he could thank Marcus properly, not with words on a piece of paper, but with actions that proved he was worthy of the second chance he'd been given. Over time, Ethan began channeling his energy into something productive. Inspired by the skills Marcus had taught him, he started experimenting with baking again, using makeshift tools in whatever cramped apartment or shared kitchen he could find. At first, it was purely therapeutic, a way to reconnect with the happiest moments of his life. But as his creations improved, so did his confidence. People noticed. Neighbors complimented his pies. Co-workers begged for slices of his cakes. Encouraged by their praise, Ethan dared to dream bigger. He saved every penny he earned, determined to open his own bakery someday. It wouldn't be fancy, not at first, but it would be honest, a reflection of everything Marcus had instilled in him. Honesty, resilience, kindness. These values became the foundation upon which Ethan built his new life. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. In that time, Ethan transformed from a lost boy burdened by guilt into a young man driven by purpose. His bakery, nestled in a vibrant neighborhood, quickly gained a reputation for its mouth-watering treats and welcoming atmosphere. Yet despite his success, Ethan never forgot where he came from, or the man who had changed his life forever. One rainy afternoon, as he stood behind the counter serving customers, Ethan made a decision. It was time to return to Willowbrook. Time to face the past he'd been running from. Time to repay Marcus Black for everything he'd done. Little did Ethan know, his arrival would spark a chain reaction that would alter both their lives once again. 5 years had passed since Ethan disappeared from Marcus's life, leaving behind only a brief note that read like a bittersweet farewell. For Marcus, those years brought solitude but also reflection. The countryside cottage provided peace, though it lacked the vibrancy of his old bakery. He spent his days tending to a small garden, reading books by the fireplace, and occasionally baking for himself, simple loaves of bread or rustic pies, just enough to remind him of the joy he once shared with others. But no matter how content he tried to be, there was an undeniable void in his heart. The absence of Ethan weighed heavily on him, not because he resented the boy's departure, but because he missed their connection. Marcus often wondered where Ethan was now, hoping against hope that he'd found happiness and purpose. Ethan, meanwhile, had built a new life for himself in the city. His bakery, named Rise and Flour, became a local favorite thanks to its warm atmosphere and delicious treats. Customers raved about his signature sourdough, which carried hints of nostalgia, a tribute to Marcus's original recipe. Beyond baking, Ethan dedicated himself to mentoring at-risk youth, offering them free meals, job training, and guidance. In many ways, he was recreating what Marcus had given him, a safe space to heal and grow. Yet, despite his success, Ethan couldn't escape the lingering guilt over abandoning Marcus. Every loaf he baked reminded him of the man who had saved him, and every act of kindness he extended to others felt incomplete without repaying the debt he owed. One evening, as Ethan closed up shop, he decided it was time to confront his past. He sat down at his kitchen table with pen and paper, drafting a letter to Marcus. It wasn't easy. Words failed him repeatedly as emotions bubbled to the surface. Finally, after several drafts, he wrote, "Dear Marcus, I know it's been years and I can only imagine how angry or disappointed you must feel. Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I thought I was protecting you from my bad luck. You gave me so much. A home, a future, and most importantly, belief in myself, and I've never stopped thinking about how I could repay you. I'm coming back to Willowbrook soon, and I hope we can meet. There's something I want to show. You. Something I think might make us both proud. The letter was mailed the next morning along with directions to Ethan's bakery. Then, with nervous anticipation, Ethan boarded a bus bound for Willowbrook. As the landscape shifted from urban sprawl to rolling hills, memories flooded back. The cobblestone streets, the smell of fresh bread wafting through the air, and the face of the man who had changed everything. When Ethan arrived in Willowbrook, he barely recognized the town. New shops lined the main street and younger faces filled the sidewalks. Still, some things remained unchanged. The church steeple standing, tall against the sky, the park where children played, and the quiet charm that made the place special. Nervously clutching his bag, Ethan walked toward Marcus's cottage on the outskirts of town. Knocking on the door sent his heart racing. When Marcus opened it, there was a moment of stunned silence. Time seemed to stand still as they stared at each other, taking in the changes 5 years had wrought. Marcus looked older, his hair grayer, but his eyes retained the same warmth and kindness Ethan remembered. And Ethan? He was no longer the scrawny, frightened boy who had rummaged through trash bins. He stood tall, confident, and full of purpose. "Ethan," Marcus finally said, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Is that really you?" "It's me," Ethan replied, smiling softly. "I came back." Without another word, Marcus pulled him into a tight embrace. Tears welled up in both their eyes as years of separation melted away. They stepped inside where Marcus insisted on making tea, a gesture so familiar it felt like stepping into the past. As they sat together, Ethan began sharing his story. The struggles of starting over, the lessons he'd learned, and the bakery he'd built in honor of Marcus. He spoke passionately about his work with at-risk youth, explaining how Marcus's example had inspired him to pay it forward. "I owe you everything," Ethan concluded, his voice thick with emotion. "And I came here to ask if you'd let me help you rebuild the bakery. Together we can bring it back better than ever." Marcus listened intently, his expression shifting between surprise, pride, and gratitude. When Ethan finished speaking, Marcus shook his head slowly, a smile spreading across his face. "You don't owe me anything, son," he said. "What you've done with your life, that's repayment enough, but if you're serious about rebuilding, I'd be honored to work beside you again." Relief washed over Ethan, followed by excitement. Over the next few days, they sketched plans for the new bakery, combining Marcus's traditional methods with Ethan's modern ideas. Word spread quickly through Willowbrook, and soon the entire town rallied behind the project. Locals donated materials, offered labor, and even held fundraisers to support the effort. The fire that had destroyed the bakery years ago now seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by the promise of renewal. As construction progressed, Ethan and Marcus spent countless hours reminiscing about the past and dreaming about the future. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, forged not just by shared history but by a mutual commitment to giving back to the community. Ethan marveled at how effortlessly Marcus slipped back into the role of mentor, guiding him through decisions big and small. And Marcus, in turn, admired Ethan's determination and vision, realizing that the boy he'd taken in all those years ago had grown into a remarkable man. One afternoon, as they stood amidst the half-finished walls of the bakery, Marcus turned to Ethan with a thoughtful look. "Do you remember the first loaf you ever baked with me?" he asked. Ethan chuckled. "How could I forget? It was lopsided and burned on one side." "Well," Marcus said, clapping him on the shoulder, "this place is going to be our best creation yet. A masterpiece just like you." Ethan smiled, feeling a surge of pride and gratitude. For the first time in years, he truly believed he was worthy of such praise. More than that, he realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something beautiful from the ashes. By the time the bakery reopened, it had become more than just a place to buy bread. It was a hub of hope and healing, offering resources for struggling families, hosting workshops for young entrepreneurs, and serving as a reminder that second chances were possible. On opening day, the line stretched down the block, filled with familiar faces from Willowbrook and curious newcomers eager to see what all the fuss was about. As Marcus and Ethan stood side by side behind the counter, cutting slices of freshly baked sourdough for their guests, they exchanged a glance that said more than words ever could. They had come full circle, not just rebuilding a bakery, but restoring a legacy of kindness, resilience, and community. And though neither of them knew what the future held, they faced it together, ready to rise above whatever challenges lay ahead. The grand reopening of the bakery was nothing short of magical. The streets of Willowbrook buzzed with excitement as people lined up hours before the doors even opened. Balloons swayed gently in the breeze, tied to lampposts along the cobblestone road, and a banner stretched across the front of the building read, "Welcome back, Black Baker's Bakery." The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the crisp autumn air, drawing smiles from everyone who passed by. Inside, the bakery gleamed with new life while still honoring its roots. Exposed wooden beams and vintage baking tools adorned the walls, paying homage to Marcus's original vision, while sleek countertops and modern equipment hinted at Ethan's innovative touch. A mural painted on one wall depicted scenes of the town, capturing the essence of community, a nod to the countless hands that had helped rebuild the space. It wasn't just a bakery anymore, it was a symbol of resilience, unity, and second chances. As customers filed in, Marcus and Ethan worked seamlessly together, their movements synchronized like a well-rehearsed dance. Marcus greeted patrons with his trademark warmth, sharing stories about the old days, while Ethan showcased his latest creations, artisanal pastries, gluten-free options, and experimental flavors inspired by global cuisines. Every bite told a story, every loaf carried meaning. Together they created an experience that went beyond food. It was connection, comfort, and hope served on a plate. But what truly set this bakery apart was its mission. Beyond selling bread and pastries, it became a sanctuary for those in need. One corner of the shop housed a small library stocked with books donated by locals, encouraging kids to read while their parents shopped. Another section featured bulletin boards where job seekers could post resumes or find volunteer opportunities. On weekends, free workshops were held for teenagers interested in learning culinary skills or entrepreneurship. Ethan poured his heart into these initiatives, knowing firsthand how transformative such support could be. Marcus watched with pride as Ethan took charge, guiding young apprentices through the intricacies of kneading dough, or teaching them the importance of patience when waiting for loaves to rise. There was something poetic about seeing Ethan mentor others the way Marcus had once mentored him. "You're doing good work," Marcus said one evening as they cleaned up after closing time. "This place is exactly what I always dreamed it could be." Ethan smiled, though there was a flicker of sadness in his eyes. "It's because of you, Marcus. None of this would have happened without you believing in me." Marcus shook his head firmly. "No, Ethan. This is all you. You've taken everything I taught you and turned it into something extraordinary. Don't ever forget that." Their partnership wasn't without challenges, of Ever's course. Running a business required long hours, tough decisions, and occasional disagreements. But through it all, their bond remained unshakable. They balanced each other perfectly. Marcus's wisdom tempered Ethan's ambition, while Ethan's energy reinvigorated Marcus's spirit. Their differences complemented one another, creating a dynamic that felt almost effortless. Over time, the bakery became more than just a local landmark. It gained national attention. Food bloggers raved about the unique flavor combinations, and news outlets highlighted the inspiring story behind its revival. Soon, visitors from neighboring towns and even other states began flocking to Willowbrook to see the legendary bakery for themselves. What started as a humble operation transformed into a thriving enterprise. Yet Marcus and Ethan never lost sight of their core values. Profits were reinvested into community programs, ensuring that success benefited everyone. One particularly memorable day, a group of former foster children visited the bakery. They were part of a nonprofit organization that Ethan had partnered with, aimed at providing resources and mentorship to youth aging out of the system. As they toured the facility, wide-eyed and curious, Ethan shared his own journey, from running away from an abusive home to finding refuge in Marcus's kitchen. His story resonated deeply with the group, sparking conversations about overcoming adversity and pursuing dreams despite obstacles. Afterward, one of the teens approached Ethan shyly. "Do you think someone like me could ever do what you did?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan knelt down to meet her gaze. "Absolutely," he replied without hesitation. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take it one step at a time, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. Trust me, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for people believing in me." Her face lit up with a mix of awe and determination. Moments like these reminded Ethan why he'd worked so hard to rebuild, not just for himself, but for others who needed someone to believe in them too. As years passed, the legacy of the bakery continued to grow. Marcus eventually slowed down, spending more time tending to his garden and enjoying retirement, while Ethan took on greater responsibility. Yet their roles evolved naturally, with Marcus serving as a guiding presence and Ethan stepping into leadership. Together they ensured that the bakery remained a beacon of hope for generations to come. On Ethan's 30th birthday, Marcus surprised him with a framed photograph taken during the bakery's grand reopening. In the picture, they stood side by side, arms around each other's shoulders, surrounded by smiling faces. Beneath it, Marcus had written a simple inscription. "To Ethan, the boy who walked into my alley became the man who rebuilt my world. Thank you for being family." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes as he read the words. For so long he'd carried the weight of guilt and fear, convinced he didn't deserve happiness. But standing there, surrounded by the life they'd built together, he finally understood the truth. Redemption wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about using them to create something beautiful. And so, the story of the black baker and the boy who returned came full circle. What began as an act of kindness in a dark alley blossomed into a lifelong friendship, a thriving community, and a testament to the power of second chances. In the end, both men realized that saving each other had changed their lives forever, and the ripple effects of their compassion would continue to inspire long after they were gone.